Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with co-hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Each week, we take an authentic dive into how mindfulness continually impacts our lives, deepens our relationships, and allows us to be emotionally alive. We filter all of our conversations through the man box, where we unpack how as men we are expected to act in society, how fighting the authentic human experience is exhausting and damaging, and how mindfulness can help. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to the show, Men Talking Mindfulness. John McCaskill coming to you from Colorado Springs, and my brother from another mother, my co-host Will Schneider in New York City. And we're very excited about today's show. We have special guests, authors of the book Reinventing Masculinity, Ed Adams and Ed Frauenheim. And we're going to get into a lot today, from defining confined masculinity to explaining how to counter it and liberate ourselves and others through liberating masculinity. Before we do that, though, I just want to give a quick shout out to our new and first sponsor, Naked Warrior Recovery. Naked Warrior Recovery is a service-disabled veteran-owned and operated supplements company owned by fellow former Navy SEAL William Branham. Their mission is to help veterans and first responders recover physically and emotionally from stress and traumatic events. Their focus is to provide superior quality and effectiveness. They offer a range of supplements from super greens for energy and recovery to broad spectrum CBD products to immune defense. Even if you are not a veteran or first responder, they have great products for you. Go check them out at the link in the comments and enter the discount code MTM2021. So MTM 2021, and you'll get 20% off. And Will post that comment or that link in the comments here in a second. Okay, all that said, I want to introduce our guests today, Ed Adams and Ed Frauenheim. Dr. Ed Adams, he earned his Doctor of Psychology degree from Rutgers University. He is a licensed psychologist and founder of Men Mentoring Men, or M3, which is a not-for-profit organization supporting men in their quest to live happier lives. Now in its 30th year, M3 has touched hundreds of lives by creating a shame-free space for men to discuss, challenge, and support their journey through the complexities of life. Currently, Ed is in a private practice in Somerville and Lambertville, New Jersey, specializing in the treatment of men. In 2013, the Society for Psychological Study of Men and Masculinity's Division 51 of APA awarded Ed the Practitioner of the Year Award. In 2018, Ed served as president of Division 51 and has helped to strengthen the division to become a stronger voice by highlighting the research, treatment guidelines, and applied psychological skills that help men thrive. Ed's major presidential initiative was to encourage men and women to recognize compassion and self-compassion as masculine traits. Ed is also an accomplished painter and sculptor. He was commissioned to create a bust of Oscar Schindler that was presented to Steven Spielberg, and a 13-foot bronze sculpture that honors Raoul Wallenberg. His paintings are in private collections, universities, corporate collections, and museums. I would love to see some of this stuff, Ed. In 2017, Ed published a book, Becoming a Happier Man, A Man's Guide to Living a Full and Meaningful Life. This book couples his paintings with the essential ingredients presented when a man declares himself as happy. Ed Frauenheim is a journalist, researcher, speaker, and book author. His main topics are masculinity and workplace culture. That's probably why you know Val, the workplace culture, as well as the intersection between the two. Most recently, he published Reinventing Masculinity, which was what we're going to be talking about today. And apart from his books, Ed's stories have been featured in Fortune, Wired, and USA Today. Ed also is co-founder of the Teal Team, a group of professionals dedicated to bringing about more soulful, conscious organizations, another place where you know Val from. He is a board member of two organizations and lives in San Francisco with his wife and two teenage children. Welcome to the show, Ed and Ed. So excited to have you with us here today. And I'm going to turn it over to Will. Will is going to lead us through an opening grounding practice and go from there.
Well, I first want to say good morning, guys, and everybody that's here. Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast, and thanks for everyone showing up that's already on the feed. Great to have another set of, or another author, two authors on today, and to further our discussion on masculinity and how we can just be better men for ourselves and for the world and for the planet. But first, like we typically do, we like to start off with real simple grounding practice as a means to show you a tool and how incredibly powerful breath and mindfulness can be, as well as an opportunity to calm John down, because I know he's really excited, and myself and Ed. And so let's just, so it's like simply find your spine. We're just going to, because I really want to maximize the time today with Ed and Reinventing Masculinity. So close your eyes, find a nice, comfortable seat. If you're comfortable closing your eyes, close those eyes. Create a nice long spine. So instead of rounding through your shoulders and collapsing your chest, right? Work from the very base of your spine through your sit bones all the way through the crown of the head. Let's open up our throat and our mouth really wide and release the energy in our throat with a big exhale out. All right, good. Let's do 5 breaths into the nose, really big. Big, big, big balloon breath. Exhale out your mouth. And do it again. Big breath in. Exhale out. Good. Again, 3 more breaths. Nice, smooth, flowing quality of breath. Ground a little deeper on the exhale. 2 more. See if you can relax on this exhale. Any tension in your face, jaw, shoulders, nice and easy. And 1 more big breath in. And exhaling smoothly out. And just stay here for a moment. Find a breath in and out of your nose and just notice how you're feeling right now. What your emotional, internal selfie. Just to see where you are and to feel how you are. Great. When you're ready, open your eyes if they're closed, and welcome to the show, everybody. So excited once again to have everybody here today. Let's begin, John. Where shall we start?
Yeah. So again, thank you both so much for being here. We love what you're doing, and we're just going to jump right into questions. So first, what inspired you? And I'm just going to fire these questions out, and you guys can figure out between the two of you who wants to answer them. But first, what inspired you both to start focusing on masculinity, confined masculinity? And at what point did you realize that you needed to write a book about it, or several books?
I could take a stab at starting that, Ed.
Sure, go ahead.
Fill in there. We didn't plan who would go first here, John will. Yeah, I think we have a kind of a neat collective story behind this focus on masculinity. For my part, this is kind of a lifelong struggle with these man rules, as we put it in the book, John. Starting off as a teenager, 12-year-old, kind of coming into this understanding of being a man and not fitting in to the rules well, being skinny when you're supposed to be probably more like what you look like, losing my 1 fist fight in 6th grade, and also, not winning sports events, even though I was athletic or loved sports, but that quest to be like strong and dominant and competitive and a winner, those were things that didn't work out so well for me. And in the work world, similarly, I went to a good college, that was great, but then I came out and I didn't rise to the top of the heap or get my stories. I was a business writer for many years. I did not get, my Pulitzer Prize. And so these things are, create shame and struggle. So I was wrestling with some of these things. And as I studied the workplace culture, as you pointed out, a Great Place to Work and other places, I realized that how men are going to succeed in the workplace that's emerging has to change. They have to stop or move away from this domineering, top-down, bossing bark kind of leader and move toward a more collaborative, emotionally intelligent, self-aware, mindful leader. So I was writing some personal essays and seeing this business convergence toward a different kind of masculinity. I connected with Ed, who's kind of the writing the book about men's happiness as an individual and coming with the psychological wisdom. So we connected, and I'll let Ed share his part of how he came to the table, if you will.
Sure. First, thank you both for having Ed and I on your show. I really deeply appreciate it. I look back at my life, and my father was part of my life, but he was a World War II veteran, and he served on Guadalcanal, and then they sent him over to Europe, which was very unusual. So he spent 5 years of his life with somebody trying to kill him. And he had post-traumatic stress disorder. We didn't know it at the time, or didn't label it that way. And he self-medicated through alcohol. So he became an alcoholic. And so I grew up with a dad who was on one hand very loving and devoted to others, and but filled with pain. And when I was old enough, I went into the minor. We were raised Catholic, and I went into the minor seminary after 8th grade, which was all male. And then I was there 2 years and went into a co-ed high school, finished that, and then went to Xavier University in Cincinnati, which is a Jesuit school, which at the time was all male. So I was surrounded by men from an early time, in many ways, finding many fathers. Only one biological father, of course, but finding many men who fathered me. And when I went into private practice and finished my degree, went into practice and so on, no one paid any attention to men. I mean, you would be hard pressed to find any mental health professional who ever took a course in the treatment of men. But I started to see men in my practice, and frankly was initially in my early years kind of intimidated by some of the men, their roughness, their hardness, and I think that was related to my experiences with Dad. What happened was I decided, besides being a psychologist, I wanted to do art. So I told my partners at the time that I was going to be reducing my clinical hours. And for some reason or another, which is a story unto itself, it didn't work out. So I left that practice. But by doing so, I left 2 of my best male friends who treated my leaving that practice as if it was a divorce. And so I was missing male company. So I decided, well, I'll start a men's group and I'll put men around me. So I started a typical clinical group. And that lasted about 6 months before I realized that something very powerful was happening. And that is, men were getting together and feeling safe with each other, and were thriving by talking about real life issues. So I changed it from a clinical group to more of a coaching model so I could participate in it. To make a long story short, that evolved over 30 years into a nonprofit organization called Men Mentoring Men, which went from a start of 3 men to now we serve over 100 men, have 5 ongoing groups in 2 geographic locations, and over the years have touched the lives of hundreds and hundreds of men. So that's that. And then, I participated in over 1,000 men meetings and facilitated weekends and groups and so on. So the men were teaching me about what works and what doesn't work about a man. And so putting that together in a book seemed to make a lot of sense. And that's, plus it's my life's work. So Reinventing Masculinity is really a sum total of much of what I've learned, both clinically and personally as a man.
Beautiful. We're very thankful that you started that group. It sounds as though you started that group mostly for yourself, almost to fill a void that had been opened up when you left that one practice. Yeah. And now it's almost like a Knights of the Round Table, if you will, where there's nobody at the head of the table and everyone is just there sharing that safe space and enjoying and benefiting from what it is you've built. And I know Will has a question at the bottom of our list, but I'd love to bring it to the top about the shaming. Will, if you want to ask that question, man.
Well, yeah. I think it's like, as I'm reading through the book, I mean, just picking out all these wonderful pieces and how like very strategically you've designed M3. And the only rule, what's the only rule? It's about shaming, right? What's the only rule, Ed Adams?
The only rule is no man shames another man.
Right, great. And yes, and that's great. So no man shames another man. So why is that? It's kind of like Fight Club, right? It's like no one that talks about Fight Club. But it's like, and that's why is that rule the only rule and obviously the most important rule because it's the only rule.
Right. Well, it was vital to create an environment where men felt safe. Robert Bly, the poet, said, "When men get together, can violence be far behind?" And what he was talking about isn't just physical violence, but the put downs, the shaming, the ridicule, and so men at that time, men did not really understand that they were surrounded by sources of shame. And so when whether it be by women or by each other, as they began to learn what shame was and how it's influenced their life, the men began to become very sensitive to how we spoke to each other, what comments we made. Our words mattered, and so that rule, no man shames another man, created an entire environment where men began to really share their own personal truth. And the reality became that no one was presenting an issue, no matter how dramatic or how simple, that other men didn't either experience, think about, or wonder about. So if you shamed another man, you were actually learning to self-shame, because the difference between ourself and someone else was really kind of a false dichotomy.
Well, I feel there's also the shame as well, because I have a couple brothers. I have a lot of men in the Schneider clan back in Pennsylvania, and I've been sitting my own men's group for a few years, and shame is something that we really identify ourselves with. And I feel like shame so much keeps us in the conversation, keeps us within the feelings of confined masculinity, which I would love to, we're going to talk about more in a second. But I feel like that shame, it's like that we talked about with Liz, John, the shame spiral, of how we're just and if we're always communicating that way, we're always feeling that way, then we're going to continually, keep that cycle and circle of shame going, which puts us in that confined masculinity, which, if we're ready to talk about or jump into that part of the conversation, which is a major, it's one of the biggest parts of the book. I love to run with that, unless we have another comment about shame.
Ed, did you have something you wanted to add on that?
I think you're right, Will, on that shame piece, and great for you to be doing your work with your group. One thing I would just add about how powerful Ed's group is with that rule is that I visited the group, talked with the number of the members, and reported on it as part of us writing this book. And what's neat and hopeful about the M3 experience is that the guys in it are still guys. They're playful. There's jokes. It's not like it's all earnest, and it's also it's not just these highly educated woke guys on the coast. You might think of like San Francisco or New York, guys that are kind of steeped in a kind of a woke culture. These guys are all over the gamut in terms of their jobs. There's a construction company owner, there's accountants, and yet they have found this way of moving past that culture of put downs and shame and overly hazing each other, to get to this place of depth and emotional honesty and deeper life fulfillment. And so I just was like, holy cow, I didn't know this was possible. And it gives me a lot of hope as we think about the kind of polarization in society and how a lot of guys are kind of stuck right now in this confined masculinity.
Mm.
Yeah. I think you bring up a really key word here, that playful. I think that that's like what is really required in order to kind of tap out of confined and go into liberating masculinity is that playful nature that I think, shame keeps us away from that authentic expression we talk so much about, John, right?
Yeah,
And that vulnerability, that playfulness is a sense of vulnerability because it has curiosity as well as discovery in it, and it requires a sense of vulnerability. So yeah, nice, very excellent.
Yeah, and I'd like to unpack that vulnerability and the confined masculinity. You used the word stuck there as well. And a few weeks back, we had the author Liz Plank. She's the author of For the Love of Men. There's a lot of overlap between the two books, and they're both phenomenal books. And she used the term toxic masculinity, which we've even used thus far in this conversation. And in your book, you use the term more often. You use the term confined masculinity. Can you explain that term and then how you see that differing from toxic masculinity? Because toxic masculinity did fuel some of the flames in our live chat. Some people took exception to that term, and I think confined masculinity may be more acceptable. But could you define that and then how it's different from toxic masculinity?
Let me say right off the bat that one of the things that we try to present in the book is the idea that fundamentally men are good people, self-sacrificing, loving, caring, generous, often unsung heroes in their own families, and underappreciated for what they often give and to others, and also appreciated for what they give to others. So when we talk about if we talked about toxic masculinity, frankly, we use it once in the book. We use that term once in the book to describe the sort of the social phenomena that has of talking about toxic masculinity, because what it does is, frankly, I think it's a source of shame for men. To think of oneself as poisonous, which toxicity is, doesn't do a lot to one's sense of self. A sense of generativity. If I'm poisonous, then I better stay away from people. If I'm poisonous, I better be very self-conscious of what I say, do, and how I act. And so it's very restrictive, and which then leads to the promotion and the continuation of confined masculinity, which, Ed, you probably can begin to describe here.
Sure, thanks, Ed. Yeah, everything Ed said, I agree with, and I think we really wanted to sort of take a more neutral, descriptive approach to just this question of masculinity today. And I think what we would say is, as I said, the behaviors might be that you see at the end are maybe dangerous or poisonous at times, but the root is something that is we think is this caged or confined masculinity. That if men are experiencing these deep assumptions that are quite limiting and constrictive, it's going to hurt them, and then hurt people, right? They will hurt others and behave in ways that are troubling. So when we took a hard look at what are these deep assumptions, and we looked at some other research as well as the latest APA work and what we're seeing in the business world for that matter as well, is that the confined masculinity is really our conventional masculinity, and it's defined by separateness and limitation. There's limited roles men can play, like the provider, the protector, and the conqueror. And then there's limited ways of relating, that we're supposed to be consistently competitive, always ready to battle. We're supposed to be stoic, withhold our emotions. We're supposed to be dominant. We're also supposed to be very self-reliant. We're supposed to be self-made men to the point of isolation. So when this is our set of options, quite a limited set, it ends up really, hurting us as men, and then that spills out in kind of unhealthy ways to all those around us.
Yeah. If I could, I just want to, because I want to get into one particular piece of the definition. I'm going to read from the book for a second, just to kind of bring this home and really nail this down into our consciousness and into our community. Confined masculinity focuses on a man's separateness more than on his sense of belonging. I mean, that's just a huge statement right there. For example, many confined men believe they should keep emotions to themselves, be self-sufficient, and show no vulnerability. Confined masculinity also has a fundamentally fearful outlook, a mindset of scarcity and ever-present danger. Confined masculinity effectively puts men in a defensive crouch, ready to snarl at perceived threats, predisposed to lash out, and struck with a distorted view of their surroundings. And that one piece of the definition that it brings it in almost a postural kind of physical nature is that crouch. And I was wondering if we can kind of unpack that a little bit, because when I read that word, I was like, and I felt that it's not even just the concept. I was like, oh my God, like I definitely know. And I'm like, so I was wondering if you can just talk about crouch a little bit, see where that takes us.
Will, I'm so glad you picked up on that passage, because that's one of my favorite passages in the book. And we were trying to really explore how this language does include an embodied element. And as Edward and I were talking about this, if you're always on the defensive, you're always ready for combat, you got to give your arm up. It's like you're stuck behind your shield. Like you can't see that much. Right. And then so we're really, and that corresponded to this inability to see the world as anything other than dangerous. And so there's no way of seeing a way to relate to others. It's not about trying to best them.
Right.
And so we can't see the opportunities to collaborate. We can't see the opportunities to play together nearly as much if we're in that crouch and with a limited perspective. And I mean, Ed, maybe you could share a story or two about some of the, even the story you shared recently about the fellow and the way he interacted with his wife seated behind his desk. Ed has such great stories that speak to this topic.
Yeah, that's a story of a man who read the book and was moved by it and decided to come in to do some therapy. And he told me this story that he's a highly successful, highly competent, capable man who is providing well for his family and so on. But in his marriage, he's sensing that there's problems brewing. And he said, typically he would bring things up with his wife. So he would invite her into his office. He'd sit behind his desk and she would sit in front of his desk. So it was more like a business transaction than an intimate conversation. So he said, after reading your book, I know we needed to have a conversation. So I invited her into my office. I set a chair so that we could sit and face each other. I took her hand and I said that I want to have a really important conversation with you about my love for you. And he also put on a rather inexpensive armband. And he said, the reason I'm wearing this is because whenever you see it, I want you to know I'm devoted and loving to you. And every time I look at it, I want it to remind me how much I feel love and feel devotion to you. And she thought he dropped out of another planet suddenly.
Right.
And
music to her ears, right?
Right. So a couple of things were happening there. It's what I refer to as a liberating masculinity moment.
Sure.
And in that moment, he changed the nature of the game.
Yeah.
He became vulnerable. He became intimate. He became open. He became more accessible to her.
Authentic.
And it made a huge difference then they decided to go away for a week together.
I wonder what that was like.
Right. Which was well overdue.
Yeah. Can I just, I love that story. And to me, like the desk is like a shield. And it kind of keeps him separate from her and also prevents him from seeing her as an equal partner in their relationship.
Right.
He's got the power position behind the desk like a businessman, and he put it aside and he could see her more fully. So that's he's not necessarily crouching, but sitting behind his desk. And so that's to connect those dots there a bit. But it's such a neat story, and loving that we're hearing some stories of impact like that.
And that anecdote, I mean, that carries out, just outside of the marriage, that can come into play in the business world and leadership. Mm-hmm. In the SEAL teams, many times I would go in to see a boss, and I would sit, much like you were just describing, on one end of the desk, and he would sit on the other. And I say he because most of my leaders in the SEAL teams are men. Sure. But anyhow, that seemed much like there was a boss. And last week, Will and I spoke about boss versus leaders. And so in that situation, there was a boss sitting on one end and somebody else, a subordinate, sitting on the other end. But then I had leaders who would come out from behind their desk, and we would sit basically at a small coffee table in their office. And it seemed, even though there was a rank disparity, that he would see me as an equal and really want to know my thoughts on things. And that really opened up the connections there. So it carries out outside of the marriage into leadership in corporate teams, in sports teams, in nonprofits, whatever the case may be. I think that's an important thing to carry out from that anecdote. And that anecdote also resonates very strongly with me right now, in that this past week, my wife and I were looking at buying a minivan, which also is a transition from the confined masculinity that I used to say, no way am I ever going to drive a minivan, but here I am. One, I drive a Fiat 500, little yellow one, and now I'm also
like a boss, John, you do.
but in the purchase of this minivan that we're looking at getting, I started moving money from one account to the other to prepare for it, and then I realized, you know what? I haven't even spoken to Becca about this. Why am I moving money and just taking care of the finances without ever communicating to my partner, my equal, not the subordinate in the marriage, but my equal? So that anecdote definitely resonates with me. And I know you shared that in the webinar series that you guys are doing together. And we want to talk more about that webinar here in a second, towards the end of the show. But prior to that, I want to talk about the 5 C's that are part of reinventing masculinity. If you could cover what the 5 C's are and then expound upon those, would love to hear that.
Yeah, you want to go with that, Ed, or you?
Sure. And yeah, to put a little context on there, these are 5 practices that we think are vital to moving from a confined masculinity to what we call liberating masculinity. And would it make sense just to give a quick definition of liberating masculinity, John? Will?
Oh yeah, please do.
Hey, absolutely.
In essence, it's a way of a kind of masculinity that frees men to live fuller lives and frees everybody around them, for that matter. So men can have more roles, and not just the 3 I mentioned before, but caregiver, sensitive lover, equal partner, steward of the environment and earth, for example, as well as relate in new ways, so that you can be emotionally available and attuned. You can be collaborative, not just competitive. You can be aware of your own privilege, aware of yourself and how you've had certain advantages, because we're not as self-made as we like to think we are. So it really is enabling a wider ability to connect with the world around us. Right. And so the 5 C's, these practices are, on the one hand, ancient or old, but we're updating them. We're talking about what it means to really make this shift and advance in our masculinity. Curiosity, courage, compassion, connection, and commitment. And just maybe I'll start with one, and you can jump in with some of the other ones. But on the curiosity piece, it's reclaiming curiosity as men. Right? We all start as curious kids, right? Little boys and girls are always asking, "Why is the sky blue?
Oh yeah,
why do airplanes not fall out of the sky?" But by the time we're 12, what was that, John?
I said, oh yeah, I've got 2 young ones, and my 2-year-old, okay. I think the only word he knows is what and why. Isn't
that the best? And it drives us crazy. But we get that driven out of us by the time we're teenagers, right? Because then we look stupid if we ask questions. We look vulnerable. We don't know the answers. We're not that know-it-all, the smartest guy in the room. But this is a vital habit and practice to ask, is this really all I can be as a man? Are these man rules that I've been accepting, are they legitimate? And then if we think about that work world piece, the boss leader piece, if men don't show up as constant learn-it-alls, that's a term of Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, instead of know-it-alls, we're going to be left behind. Things are too fast.
Right.
Things are shifting in such a way. You've got to be ready to learn, which means being vulnerable if you're going to really thrive as an employee, as a leader today. Ed, let me ask you to kind of continue with the other C's there.
Okay. One thought on curiosity, though, is the idea that the reason we use the word reinventing masculinity is that men have to be aware that the way we're taught to be men is invented. It's not built in. It's invented. It's socially constructed. And we give many examples of how ideas of what it means to be a man have changed over time. So curiosity fits in when you begin to understand, if that's invented, then is it working for me? You know, is it working for our relationships? Am I happier? Am I more successful with being a father or a partner? Then once you have the idea that these invention ideas, these concepts need to be challenged, it takes a great deal of courage to begin to question them and to have the courage to challenge them within yourself and within other men. This is where men mentoring men, M3, it's so helpful to have other men helping other men identify confined masculinity traits and in a non-shaming way challenge them, you know, or make suggestions like, yeah, instead of complaining about this issue with your wife, why don't you talk to her? Right. You know, why don't you have that conversation? Novel idea.
Yeah, you imagine that?
And slowly, because other men are sharing not only issues, but their success stories, it builds courage. It builds the courage to challenge those long-held, those ideas are not sacred. They are worthy of being challenged. And so that's where curiosity comes in. Yeah. And then I'll say something about compassion, and Ed, you could say something about the connection piece. And you know, the longer I've been in practice, the more I realize that when positive change occurs, there's always an increase in compassion. Yeah. And by definition, compassion is the recognition of the suffering or the pain or discomfort in someone else, and the willingness to do something about it or to prevent it. Self-compassion is recognizing your own suffering, pain, or discomfort, and then having the curiosity, the courage to do something about it, to prevent it, or to prevent it. So compassion becomes like both a process and a result. It's a process of connecting with others, of being involved with others, of seeing others, and having the courage to actually see suffering. You know, when the Gulf War started, and I was watching, you know, I'm old enough to remember the Vietnam War, and the coverage during that time was very graphic. You saw people get shot, you saw people die, you saw blood, and it was like it evoked compassion in the nation, and not everybody, but in the nation. In the Gulf War, what you saw was a video game, a little thing looking at a target and the target blowing up, and there was no humanity to it. There were people dying. There were innocent people dying too, on both sides. And so the more detached we become from having the courage to actually acknowledge suffering, If we move away from that, we reduce compassion. If we move towards that, we become more alert of the suffering within ourselves and the desire to help other people. That piece is built into the equipment. That is part of our evolution. Compassion is not invented. It's part of our evolution. It has its roots in attachment.
It's in our biology.
Our biology, and its roots in bonding. What new child could exist more than a few hours without attachment?
Yeah. Well, you say, you know what, just to back this up, you mentioned the Dalai Lama here in your book, and it says, Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion.
Right.
So,
Right. That's right.
And that's maybe a good segue, Will, to the connection piece, because what we're calling on there, the practice of acknowledging these bonds that we have with others, with everyone around us, and also we say with sort of the web of life on Earth, that this, and then to nurture those bonds and to expand on them. It's saying, you know, we can't be in that purely separate identification as men, the self-made man, or let our bonds be simply sort of tribal, where we're getting together with other men in opposition to other men or other people. It's kind of a universal understanding of the spaceship Earth, as Buckminster Fuller put it, that we all are all interconnected. And then actually taking some steps to start strengthening, nurturing those connections, and starting to see ourselves as a steward of the Earth. And then the last C, if I can jump into that one too, Ed, is commitment, which sort of is applying all the other four and being real about it, sticking with it when it's tough, creating habits. There's a lot of science around self-improvement, all the sort of personal analytics around fitness you can start applying to your identity as a man. Some of the mindfulness habits that I know you guys are doing such great work on. And there's some great role models out there. And just to mention one in the business world, the CEO of Cisco, the technology giant, Chuck Robbins, comes to my mind. You may have remember we talked about him in the book, but he's a guy that felt connected in ways that business leaders didn't always in the past. In recent years, he had a dream that he was in his San Jose community visiting a homeless encampment, which is a major problem in the San Francisco Bay Area. And he saw the face of his pastor and his father in this dream. And it prompted him the next morning to say, I've got to do something about this. He called the mayor of San Jose and kicked off a program to devote tens of millions of dollars to homeless housing, and kind of prompted the entire company of 80,000 employees to get more involved in community service, and not at the exclusion of business success. In fact, they launched the most successful product during his tenure as CEO. It's more that the employees were like, yeah, this guy is inspiring me, and I want to be part of this company and give my all. So this is the kind of connectedness happening in the top of the business world, and we can be motivated by these kind of role models to stick with it and know that we're heading in the right direction.
Well, I think it's fascinating. You talked about Cisco, and it's no longer just transactional, right, and money, right? It's humanity. Right. And by being and living in the energy of humanity, we light up more of our humanity, which is ultimately, you said, connectedness. There's also, you mentioned in the book, the interdependence on one another. That's how we thrive as an individual connecting, but also as we thrive as a human species.
There's an exercise that actually pre-COVID exercise that I would ask some men to do, which is to, on visiting hours, go to a hospital, pick up a dozen roses at a 7-Eleven or something like that, and walk around the hospital. And when somebody doesn't have a visitor, just walk in and offer them a rose. And to make that, I asked them to make that commitment to me to do that. Then if we work backwards, that commitment allows them to see how connected they are to others. And then if you step back from that, how compassion makes a huge difference, not only in the person they're gifting the rose to, but within themselves. And frankly, it takes courage to do that. And it takes a lot of curiosity to say, Can I do this? Am I brave enough to do this? Will this even matter? Things of that nature. So the 5 C's don't work only forward to backward, they work backward to forward, and they get all mixed up in between. They're very kinetic.
Yeah,
definitely. And wow, got tongue tied there. So we're starting to come a little bit close to time here, but I want to ask a few more questions, and then I want to give an opportunity for you to, promote your book and promote your webinar. But in the book, you mentioned that society has actually benefited from confined masculinity at times. And how can we go about reinventing masculinity while we make sure that we don't miss out on the advances we could be making if we kept and maintained the status quo of confined masculinity?
I could take a stab at starting that, John. There is nothing wrong with the provider and protector identities, and they've done a lot of great things for humanity. They've fed our families, they've protected companies, but also countries against invasions. Ed's father and yourself and many men and women, for that matter, have put their lives on the line for great causes, for democracy and freedom. And we don't want to take away that. It's more that we see this liberating masculinity as an additive set of choices, giving us more options and a fuller expression of our humanity. And so it's a great point you're raising there. Similarly, we're basically talking about a blend of some masculine energies and feminine energies. This is the yin yang sign, got it, thousands of years ago, where yes, we're still going to be assertive and stand up for what's right. Some of those masculine features, and also, but let's open our receptiveness, our sensitivity, some of the more feminine features, energies, so that we really can be integrated and solve the global problems we have in ways that we can if we're just that hard, aggressive, self-made men.
wow.
Ed, would you add anything to that?
Well, I think you covered that pretty well, Ed.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to jump in and say one more thing, and then I guess we can start closing, John, as much as I don't want to end this conversation at all.
I know.
This is so great, but I think it's like coming back to the 5 C's and the practicing of the 5 C's is going to, we talked about, our connection. I'm going to pick on here a little bit or kind of pick apart. It's that, if we're practicing connection, right, we're going to actually hack into that biology that we talked about earlier. And oxytocin being one of those hormones that is this bonding agent between us. And therefore, by practicing handing out roses or just hellos on the street to people that, at the bodega or, people at the grocery store, or just saying, hello to your significant others in a more meaningful way, is actually going to help us to feel that biology and that connection within ourselves and therefore other people. And maybe we won't be as scared of it as much. And we'll get out of that crouching position and into more of a wholehearted way of posturing, as well as being in the world and functioning and communicating in the world beyond transactional and into more meaningful and vulnerable way of being and helping and really speaking to one another.
Yeah, it's well put. And could you imagine what the world would be like if men over the past couple of 100 years haven't held themselves back because of the confined nature of beliefs about what it means to be a man? I would dare say if men let it rip and really let their talent, skills, and their love and their connectedness rip, we wouldn't recognize the world right now as it is.
Completely. Yeah, that's
Definitely.
awesome.
Can I add for one small step, like you're getting at, when you get to that the world that Ed's getting at? I love the examples you gave, the saying hello more fully to people in the neighborhood, the bodega, their spouse. One thing that can be powerful, especially to men in our 50s, 60s, 70s, is connecting back to old friends, childhood friends. Yeah. I know I've been doing that with like a text thread of like 14 of us high school, middle school guys. And it's been a really beautiful experience. We were much more that, semi-confined guys razzing each other a lot. And yet there's now moments of like vulnerability and interstitched interwoven with like sports fandom and playfulness, but it's really that's a way that a lot of guys, I think, can safely enter this territory. To your point, like, how do we get them to go in different directions? Like, go back and talk to your old friend. They're still alive. They know you at a really young age, and it may be easier to do than starting to make new friends, is to connect with some old ones.
Yeah. And
Indeed.
it's probably a safe start too, because you know them. So
and loneliness in men is frankly epidemic.
yeah. That's a question that we have here, but I don't know if we're gonna.
Maybe
we'll have you guys back.
Would
be great.
We spoke a little bit about that a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Will and I spoke about that a couple of weeks ago when we had Liz on, and or it may have been right after we had Liz on, but we both really kind of asked each other, how many close friends do we have that we stay in regular contact with? Like, obviously in high school and junior, middle school, we have a bunch of friends kind of running together or whatever. And in the SEAL teams, you have a lot of buddies that you're kind of doing things with all the time. But now that I've left the military, I can honestly tell you that, and I've moved to a new area, I don't have that many close friends. As a matter of fact, probably one of my best friends is Will, and I've never actually met Will personally.
That's awesome, John.
Everything has been virtual. So, I mean, Will and I have had some pretty deep conversations, and we've shared that with everyone. But it's pretty amazing how there's almost like a fear of developing new friendships as a man. It feels almost as though that in and of itself, developing a new friend is feminine. And there's even a term, bromance. Like, if you have a friend with that's a male, people are like, oh, you're spending a lot of time with your male buddy. Is that a bromance? And
right. John, isn't that sort of becoming an okay term? I mean, I think Ed and I are pretty hopeful about where things are going. And I think that term is actually a good sign, because it's like, bromances are okay. It's not the old homophobic taboo declaration. It's sort of saying, we're all rom-com guys on some level. Like, we can go there and have these bromances. So I think that's kind of a hopeful term.
No, I do too. And one of the things that you also hit in the book was one of the men in the M3 group. I think it was in the M3 group. Eventually came to a point where he loved the rest of the team, and he was like, I love you guys. And I mean, that's an acceptable term amongst men, and I'm glad that it's gaining more acceptance. So as we're starting to wrap up, I want to give you guys an opportunity to promote the book, promote the other work that you guys are doing. For those who are watching, the book is Reinventing Masculinity by Ed Adams and Ed Frauenheim. And then I know both of you have you have Ed Adams, you have M3, Ed Frauenheim, you have the TEAL team. I'd love each of you to speak about that. And then for our listeners, watchers, whoever else, how they can get a hold of you, and then we'll start to wrap it up. Ed Adams, we'll start with you.
Okay. Reinventing Masculinity, Liberating Power of Compassion and Connection is available at your local bookstores. It's available on Amazon. And it makes a great gift for your sons as well as your brother-in-laws. And frankly, it's a great book for women to read, because it puts them in touch with men who are moving towards a liberating masculinity. Men Mentoring Men, people can contact Men Mentoring Men by going to the website, which is menmentoringmen.org. Our book is on reinventingmasculinity.com, and people could get to me by going to DREDADAMS, DrEdAdams.net. As one of my patients pointed out, it spells Dread Adams.
Watch out for Ed.
That's no accident.
That's right. And Ed?
Thanks, Ed. Sometimes we're also known as the two-headed monster. So it's either the
two-headed monster. That's hilarious.
But thanks for that invitation. I am working through this group called the TEAL team at thetealteam.com, helping with organizational cultures evolve to a higher consciousness and a better masculinity. You can find me on LinkedIn, as Ed said, you can find our book on Amazon, also reinventingmasculinity.com. And I'm offering workshops on reinventing masculinity at work in particular. So if that's of interest, please let me know. You can contact me through LinkedIn or that Teal Team site. And thanks for that opportunity to talk about everything today, John and Will.
Oh my,
Absolutely.
yeah, our pleasure.
Now, something in the future, just so your listeners are aware, Ed and I are developing a course based on the book, and we're in the process of making that happen. And maybe that would be a good reason to come back on your show.
We would love to have you back. I actually just dropped reinventingmasculinity.com in the feed, as well as menmentoringmen.org in the feed. So it's there and it's going to live there forever. I think maybe in another, couple months, or once you get this, whenever you feel, I would love to have you guys back. We still have a hell of a lot of questions and I think it would be really a lot of fun to forward this conversation. Because we, John and I and Men Talking Mindfulness, we're growing a community of more conscious men. And I just feel so much more passion and so much more responsibility to do this work because of the need and this kind of gaping hole of this connection that is really needed in order for us to really transform into the world that we can have. All hands on deck kind of thing, right?
That's right. Well, you two guys are doing a great job and a greater service than you can imagine. Thank you.
Well, thank you for
I imagine
that.
It's all hands on deck, and then sometimes they go under the water.
Exactly.
As the SEALs guys and gals do.
That's right. For sure. Well, that all said, what we do, Ed and Ed, at the end of our shows is we wrap it up, much like Will started the show off with another grounding practice. And I know you mentioned mindfulness and meditation in your book as a way to really get into touch with what it is you're experiencing, and also to grow that compassion and that curiosity, that beginner's mind, which Will and I are going to talk about in a few episodes. It is such an important thing. And I love that. What was it? The learn it alls. That I love that. I'm going to use that from now on. So, okay, that said, we'll just wrap it up with a quick grounding practice. Keep it short and sweet. So if you're comfortable doing so, go ahead and close your eyes. Otherwise, just lower your gaze and soften your focus and bring your attention again to your breath. And we're just going to do 3 box breaths, breathing in for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, holding for 4, and doing that 3 times over. So begin by breathing out all your air, breathing in, hold for 4, let it go for 3, 2, 1, hold for 4, breathing in, hold for 4, let that go for 3, 2, 1, hold for 4. One more, breathing in for 4. Hold for 4. Letting that go, nice and easy. 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold for 4. And we're done. Go ahead and come out of the practice as you're ready. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. Again, it's been an honor and a privilege. We really appreciate it. Will, I'll turn it over to you to wrap up the show.
Again, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for this great book. I really encourage, I have been, my eyes are even more open now by reading this book. So get a hold of it. It's in our feed. I don't want to, we weren't ignoring the comments today. We got a lot of great comments here from everybody. All like the 20 some people that were on the live feed. We're going to do a follow-up episode next week. So please tap into that. We're going to answer those questions and dig a little bit deeper here. And also please subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, share this with your community, share this with the men in your life that might be inspired by this work, or that help, or that are confined, and gently bring them into this conversation. Hope we can create a more liberating world around masculinity, where we all can thrive, men, women, everybody, environment, children, animals, And thank you once again, everybody. And we'll have you guys back again. Ed and Ed, so much appreciate it. John, thanks for holding space. And have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining Will and John on Men Talking Mindfulness. If you enjoyed the show, please like and share it with your friends and family, and please, we would appreciate a review too. Until next time, this has been Men Talking Mindfulness. Thanks for showing up.